I think that particularly today, it's really important to talk about how you're going to communicate, how the landlord and the tenant want to communicate. It used to be people did everything either in writing or in person, and now we've got Facebook, we've got email, we've got texting, and what works for the landlord? They need to be able to tell the tenant, this is how you need to communicate with me, and make sure that the tenant then has the ability to do that.
Yeah, not all conflict needs mediation. We recognize that people can work through their conflicts clearly and very well, but some people kind of get lost in the process. So to remind people, there are some simple tools.
Well, I think the thing that you need to do is to learn to communicate clearly with people. One way to do that is to learn to replace you statements with I statements. You know, everyone is upset if someone comes up to them and says, you did such and such. It obviously makes you defensive, and it isn't going to be helpful in solving anything. So we teach people to talk about their needs. As an example, a tenant would go up to the landlord and they would say, every time I call about something being wrong in my apartment, you ignore me. And I don't even know if you've gotten the call, and so I have to call again, and it's really upsetting. Well, so the landlord is, taken aback, and it's defensive. But if a tenant would say to the landlord, when I have a maintenance need in my apartment, I really need to know that when I call you or text you or leave you a message about it, that you've heard. And also, hopefully, when you think you'll get it fixed, because then I can stop worrying about it. So that gives the landlord a chance to say, oh, okay, well, the best way to communicate with me is this, or, something like that, to start working on how they're going to communicate about the problem. Well, if I'm a landlord and I come up to you and I say, you never pay your rent on time and it really, really, really is getting bad and it's got to change, then you as a tenant, you go, well, wait a minute, I often pay my rent on time. I have been late a couple times. You feel real defensive. But if a landlord comes to you and says, several times you've been late with your rent, and that makes it really hard for me because I have to plan, expenses around here, we're repainting, we're remodeling, that kind of thing, then you're more open to having a discussion about, okay, what's going to happen if I am going to be late with my rent? Do I tell you? You can start working on a solution. Validation is another tool that you can use when trying to work through a dispute with someone.
And that's offering back to the other person, once you've heard from them what their interests or needs are, then you can say, well, I heard you say, and it doesn't mean that you agree with what the other person is saying. It's really just offering the benefit to the other person that they're clearly heard and understood.
If you notice that the person keeps bringing up the same concern over and over and over again, it's because they don't think that you've heard them. So when you validate them and let them know that you've heard them, then they can go on from there and you can work on solving the problem.
Because if what you're reflecting back to them in the validation isn't right, they'll be quick to correct you. And then they'll offer, no, that isn't what I meant. I meant to say, and can you understand it now if I say it differently this way? And if the other person isn't offering you a validation, you can ask them, could you repeat back to me what I said? Because I want to make sure that you understand what I'm saying and that we're clear on this. So it can be a two-way opportunity. It doesn't have to be just one person validating the other all the time. And if the other one isn't volunteering it, just ask for it.
It's really important when you're going to talk to someone about a dispute that you think about your need rather than your position. And an example of that would be that you go to your neighbor and you say, your dog barks and barks and barks all the time, and you have to get rid of that dog. Well, that's your position. But that doesn't leave much room for any kind of compromise or creative solution because that person obviously is not going to want to get rid of their dog. But if you go to the person and say, you know, I work at night, I sleep during the day, your dog barks, we need to find a solution, then that allows for the other person to think about how you're going to solve the problem. So if you're a landlord and you go to the tenant and you say, you always have parties and they are loud and everyone is complaining and you have to stop. That's it, they have to stop. Well, the tenant obviously is going to object, and it's probably not a realistic request, and it's probably not exactly what the landlord needs to say. So if the landlord were to go to the tenant and say, I'm getting a lot of complaints about parties, can we talk about this and about the noise and, you know, what we can do about it? You know, the other thing about that is to have tenants communicate when they're going to have parties or that kind of thing. They're going to be taking up all the parking, whatever. If you talk to the neighbors, then the neighbors understand because probably they do the same thing. It's just that communication. So if the landlord and the tenant can talk about the parties in a reasonable way and not just getting rid of all the parties, but talk about, you know, the time of day the parties happen, when they end, that kind of thing, then they can reach a solution that works for both.